Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for joining me. Um, my name is Edmund Glasnap. I am Elire's Treasury Advisory Practice Lead. And I am also an experienced project manager that has primarily focused on Treasury and technology implementations. And today I'll be reviewing one of the tools Elire uses for engineering a digital Treasury strategy. So, quick overview of the agenda for today. I'll do a quick overview of Elire's industry experience. I'll also take a quick look at the Treasury landscape that we're in and introduce the concept of process maturity. To do this, I will highlight the enablers of Treasury process maturity by focusing on design, metrics, owners, performers, and infrastructure. And ultimately, I'll end the session with how maturity analysis and strategic planning can work together to drive best practices for moving forward. And we will potentially have time for some questions at the end. So please feel free to ask anything as needed. Speaking to Elire's experience, we are a full service consulting firm with a foundation in Treasury advisory and technology implementations. We have served as trusted advisor to our clients with over 250 TMS and roadmap engagements. We help our clients by partnering effectively to implement software. We provide strategic roadmap guidance to extract best practices in core processes, and we have a deep commitment to excellence and quality. And you can also hear one thing I want to highlight. We have partnered with Oracle, Kyriba, FIS, and other cloud solutions because we like to keep those partnerships alive and engage with our clients so that we can really deliver all the value we can. Quick overview of Elire's Treasury practices. You know, we all work together as one Treasury center of excellence at Elire. But I primarily focus on Treasury advisory services, but we also do ERP implementation services, cloud implementation services, and TMS managed services. And finally, our client experience. You know, I'm proud to say that I've been with Elire for over 9 years now, and I am proud to say that I've actually been a part of a lot of the projects, Treasury projects that you see here. You know, we've made some great relationships with our clients, and we've had some great experiences along the way. But I did want to kind of show that off quickly. But that is enough about Elire. Let's get into the presentation itself. Let's talk about the landscape today and what I hear from clients. You know, you've all heard this. We all know a lot has happened in the last year. These word clouds that we produce are a fun way to visualize all the interesting things I hear my clients discuss, but also all the things that they're concerned with. And the reality is, it also represents how chaotic things can get with fundamental changes to finance and operations, especially the ones that we're seeing that are happening, that happened last year, that are happening this year. So, you know, this is where I like to emphasize that having the right tools to build a treasury strategy can truly turn some of the chaos into order. So treasury technology today, where we were, where we are, where we're going. I like to reference this slide because last year I was able to do a presentation. I was lucky enough to do a presentation with Steve Wiley, a strategic director at FIS. And part of that conversation really focused on how and what technology was pushing the needle in 2020. You know, we discussed AI, next-gen cybersecurity, RPAs, APIs, real-time treasury, and to a certain extent, all these things drive performance within your treasury. When looking at 2021 and the economic environment that we're in, looking at everything that's been going on, some of the more fundamental elements of Treasury have remained in the forefront with our clients and Treasury managers. You know, there's a huge focus on risk management. They're still looking into cloud automation. You know, working capital and managing working capital is critical. Global liquidity, global bank connectivity, these are all really critical and fundamental things, because ultimately, at the end of the day, those are going to manage the volatility we're seeing in the market right now. Again, these remain some of the most critical elements that drive Treasury performance. You know, one thing I do want to call out is real-time Treasury and APIs, because we have seen a lot of our cloud, a lot of the cloud services and vendors focus on APIs so that they can truly deliver real-time data. And so that's definitely something we're seeing right now. And I think we have a quick poll question.
Yes, thank you, Edmund. The first poll question is going to be, which of the following Treasury processes is your organization most concerned about improving or implementing in 2021? I'll give a couple seconds to answer. And it looks like votes are still rolling in, but I'm going to end it for the sake of time. So Edmund, it looks like it's across the board, but some of the top ones are real-time Treasury and APIs, work capital management, and also global blank connectivity and Swift GPI.
Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, I guess I'm not surprised that we're seeing, or that it's top of mind. APIs, that's definitely being pushed right now. It's definitely something that I'm seeing is going to contribute a ton of value, because at the end of the day, having integrated data into a TMS or even into your ERP, or bi-directional, right? You're going to need that integration, and APIs are allowing that to be done efficiently. So I'm not surprised that when I'm seeing that. But a lot of the fundamentals are staying the same. It's more reprioritizing and adjusting and recalibrating, in a way, how we look at the treasury processes. So let's jump into the process maturity model, how we look at that, how it relates to treasury. I want to jump into that. So pulling all this back to treasury, one thing I want to highlight is that, there are 5 critical enablers of process performance. And so when we're looking at process maturity and then relating it to treasury processes, we have to look at design. Design meaning the specification of work activities in the process. And when I'm saying this, I don't just isolate treasury processes. Take the time to build end-to-end designs for all the processes that touch treasury. Doing this will always result in critical down and upstream improvements. So design is a key factor. Metrics. How are the processes measured? How are they baselined? And how are you going to determine if improvements have been made? So what type of treasury metrics can we look at? Some examples of KPIs that can be very beneficial can include error rates for accuracy of cash forecasts. Others might focus on operational performance. As an example, we might look at time required for determining cash positioning versus your benchmark, or a ratio system generated payments versus manual payments. These are all the types of metrics you can see. By the way, there's a lot of great resources on AFP on metrics that I've seen over the years. I'd be glad to point anyone in the right direction if you're interested, because there's a lot of cool metrics out there that can be used. And I honestly rarely see them leveraged as much as they should be in a lot of implementations. So moving on from metrics, looking at the owners of the processes is very critical. We need to look at who's accountable and who is in charge of the processes. So you have to identify owners, align them with activities, and then also define the level of authority that they have as they relate to those business processes. These are all critical pieces of ownership of those processes. And again, that's one of the enablers that is going to drive performance. Then we can look at performers, who's actually executing the work, what are their skills, knowledge, and attitude towards the processes. At the end of the day, if you prioritize the people who are actually executing those treasury activities, you'll see a huge increase in performance. One thing, infrastructure as the last enabler, we need to look at the information systems and technology that support the process itself. Infrastructure is the most obvious. You think of technology, you immediately think of infrastructure. But one of the most important concepts that I would like everyone to get out of this is that, and get out of process maturity, is simply that you can't always focus solely on technology and information systems to solve all your treasury process pain points. Wherever you're at, you need to consider all the enablers when pushing the needle within your own treasury. So moving on. So how do you measure all this, right? So there's 5 levels of maturity, and they're measured on a continuum. And so let's take a look at that. Some processes themselves might be informal. They would be unorganized, chaotic results, no defined process. Some processes might be more functional and operate consistently. These are reliable, predictable, and manageable. Some processes might be standardized and high performing. They consist of end-to-end design. Some processes might be collaborative and integrate with other processes throughout the organization. And some processes might be leading. These would extend outside the company and extend to all your suppliers and yield world-class results. As you can clearly see, we've defined various points on the continuum that allow you to measure where you are now and where you want to be. So when you're looking at this continuum, at a highest level, you look at the process and you can measure it this way. But at the same time, each one of your enablers is at one of these levels. And pushing those enablers together are going to ultimately drive where your process is going to be. So quick poll question number 2. I'll turn it over to Katie.
Thanks, Edmund. Yeah, the last poll question is, according to the maturity scale, where would you rate your treasury processes for your organization? Informal, functional, standardized, collaborative, or leading? I'll give a couple seconds to answer. Looks like votes are still rolling in, but I'm going to close out here. So Edmund, it looks like the group is either functional, standardized, collaborative, or leading. So a good variety.
Yeah, no, that's good. It looks like 50% functional. Okay, yeah, and I would say this is pretty accurate. A mature treasury operation it can only operate if they do have, if they are at a functional level. And ultimately we see a lot of processes that are standardized. I think, depending on how centralized you are and how or how decentralized you are, it might translate to one of these as well. Some processes, whether they're driven through functionality within your ERP system, whether they're driven through another technology source, might sit either functional or standardized. But I do see a lot of processes that translate um, to being functional, but ultimately could be driven to a more standardized collaborative place. And lots of times we don't have to be leading on every process either, right? So that's something that can come in time. So kind of tying this all together and looking at how and what type of analysis you can do. Treasury maturity analysis really uh, allows us to kind of visualize this. So this is our treasury day in the life graphic, and now I always look at it like analysis. You have to start with an overview of your treasury, right? How is your treasury set up? Your operations, the systems involved, the processes involved, right? This ties back to what we've been talking about. And here's an overview of how Elire sees treasury. And I would argue this is how a treasurer would want to operate as well. Clear and precise processes, defined, organized, and within reach. And here I really want to highlight some of these processes because it is ultimately very valuable to look at these. How are you setting up new accounts? How are you doing your daily reporting? How manual are these processes, right? When you're performing cash forecasting, do you have reports that you're running? Is this automated? Where are your data sources? Also look at how you're reviewing your daily positions. What tools are you using to review those? How are payments integrated within your system? How are they integrated with your counterparties? Additionally, how are you sending those payments to your banks? Are you conducting cash sweeps? What kind of transfers are you doing? All these business processes are very critical and need to be looked at. You could get into some more complex processes like executing trades and hedges, recording debt and investment. How are you accounting for that debt and investment? Those systems and those processes sometimes rely on a lot of different resources and technology to accurately record. So take a look at those. One of the things I see right off the bat as a kind of a quick win and huge improvements is always around bank account reconciliation. So when you're reconciling your bank statements against your transactions and then ultimately to the GL, we see a lot of room for improvement there because traditionally we've seen a lot of resources needed for that. A lot of these technology solutions offer help there, but you can't get there without defining and looking at the processes from a holistic standpoint. So that's something we've definitely seen a lot of improvement in. And then ultimately, what kind of dashboards and analytics are you using? Are you relying on your ERP, on your TMS? There's tons of tools out there. How are you taking that approach? So the first thing that you can do to truly help understand how to tie everything together is to ultimately visualize the treasury maturity analysis itself. And this is what we're trying to do here. You can take your processes that you've identified through some level of current state analysis, right? You're going to have to take that treasury wheel that I just showed you is an example of what your treasury could look like, but ultimately you want to look at what you're truly doing. So you do some level of current state analysis. You look at any disconnects or anything that impedes efficiency. And once you understand how you can measure and track your processes along the continuum that we highlighted earlier, whether they're informal, functional, standardized, collaborative, or leading, once you do that, you can visualize where you are and where you want to be. So in this example, you can see, you know, my cash forecasting might be at a functional level, but we ultimately want to get to a more collaborative level. I have a lot of clients that rely on a lot of different sources of data for their cash forecasting. Um, and sometimes it means they're very decentralized and they're relying on very manual processes to pull in data. Well, if you can centralize those processes with the help of technology, ultimately you can become more collaborative. These are the types of things you can look at. You know, some processes might not necessarily move out of a certain range on the continuum. This example, intercompany transactions, you know, you might be able to optimize some aspects of that treasury process. However, ultimately, it might just always stay in a standardized state. Um, these are the types of things we see. And you know, one thing to highlight here again is remember that all 5 enablers are required to push the needle. To get you from functional to collaborative, you need to look at all 5 enablers within that process, because that's really what's going to push the needle at the end of the day. So getting to the end of the presentation, I did want to highlight how treasury maturity and strategic planning work together, and some of the tips that, you know, I can offer on how to, you know, start and move forward. You know, it's always critical to define the business objectives of your treasury operations and set deadlines for moving forward, right? You actually need to set those deadlines. Um, Specify how you're going to get there tactically and strategically. Identify those approaches so that you can meet those objectives. KPIs, identify some metrics that are actually going to let you evaluate whether you're moving forward or not. You need this to meet expectations. Additionally, you want to measure the processes that you're targeting as well, right? And you also want to look at the maturity level of each enabler. Again, maturity level of a process is only as good as the maturity level of each of the enablers within that process. So it's really critical to look at it not just at a high level, but also get into some more details of each enabler. Decide where you want to be. You need to look at where you are, but you need to make a decision on where you want to be. This will allow you to meet that desired performance. Do the analysis for each process and have a plan in place for it. Some processes might require a few minor changes. Some processes might require a full implementation of something, but come up with a plan for each one, and take action. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you need to take action and move forward. So, getting down to the wire here, I hope that this was beneficial. This is a very strategic approach of looking at treasury and all the enablers. These are the points I wanted to highlight when it comes to treasury maturity and how to tie them to strategic planning. And at the end of the day, those pain points that you have right now, if you take those and you look at where you are on the maturity continuum, it's ultimately going to let you successfully plan those changes that you need. So with that said, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today. I'll pass it over to you, Katie. I don't know if there are any questions or where we're at.
Yeah, thank you, Edmund. It looks like we had a couple come through that I just want to answer quickly before the bottom of the hour. But the first one is going to be, what does a typical timeline look like for moving a process from one stage to another? And does improving the process also disrupt it for the duration it takes to improve it?
That's a good question. I think the timeline looking at a timeline is difficult without, kind of breaking down the process and looking at every aspect. I think depending on how critical the process is and how many resources it's touching, there could be some disruption. However, a lot of times when you're actually just doing the analysis, you're not going to have any disruption with anything. When you look at actually implementing a change, this is where I have to go to my project management side and say, what, change management is ultimately a very critical piece of this. Any changes you're making to your organization, whether it's just in Treasury or anywhere, you want to acknowledge that and identify the impact that those changes are going to have. And so, yes, there could be disruption if you don't have those change management resources in place. So that's kind of how I would approach it.
Thanks, Edmund. And the final question we're going to answer today is, with most things being done remotely, is Treasury technology shifting towards being more mobile? And will Treasury teams be able to manage processes through their phones, or is that too much of a security risk?
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting question. So I think we've all been forced to do things remotely. So I think that kind of is what it is. I think that the cloud solutions that we're seeing are offering a lot of functionality that can be done through your mobile. And I've seen a lot of clients have to move to a remote option. At the same time, I do remember last year, a lot of vendors, not necessarily offering a solely mobile ready solution, more of a remote ready solution, right? That's the beauty of the cloud concept. So a little bit of both. I know that some vendors don't necessarily have dedicated mobile apps or anything like that. However, I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing that. I think the primary focus, though, is going to be on a change to more remote work, and then ultimately having that available to everyone.
Thank you, Edmund. So that's all we're going to be doing for Q&A today. If you guys have any additional questions, a recording will be sent out in the next couple of days. So feel free to reply to that email and follow up with any other questions you have. And just thanks again. Please engage with Elire on social media. This is where we're going to be posting upcoming webinar information, future conference stuff, as well as new content weekly. So check us out there. And we appreciate you joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.